Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's ASEN seminar. It's part of the themed seminar series we've been holding this year on nation building for the 21st century, reflections on the impact of migration, multinationalism and multiculturalism on the nation building project. Tonight we're very lucky, we have two great speakers and a really interesting topic for us to talk about and discuss. Tonight we're looking at building ethnic differences in the nation, ethnic power sharing post-Cedar revolution in Lebanon. As I said, we have two great speakers. The first will be Dr. Michael Kerr from King's College London. He's the director of the Centre for the Study of Divided Societies and senior lecturer in Middle Eastern Studies at King's College London. He's a graduate of Essex University and the London School of Economics, so he's coming back to his roots here, which is very nice. And he's also was a Liverpool Research Fellow between 2007 and 2008. He's the author of 3 books on regulating political conflicts in Lebanon and Northern Ireland. His forthcoming book, The Destructors, the story of Northern Ireland's lost peace process, will be published by the Irish Academic Press in May 2011, so look out for that. Also, we're very lucky to have Nadim Shehadi, who's an Associate Fellow for the Middle East and North Africa Project, Chatham House, and previously the Director for the Centre for Lebanese Studies in Cambridge. He's also published widely on topics in the Middle East, including Palestinian refugees, a regional perspective, Lebanon, futile victory, the Special Tribunal for Lebanon, UN on trial, and Lebanon, capitulate or escalate. By way of saying something about the format, we're going to have a brief talk from each of our speakers tonight, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers. So hopefully we should have an interesting debate. I'll hand you over to Michael. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much for that very kind introduction, and yes, it is always very nice to be back at the LSE, and it's nice to be back in partnership with Nadim. And Nadim and I are often asked to do these double acts, and we will try and endeavour to disagree if we can, to make debate more interesting towards the end. I want to throw out a couple of questions tonight. One is, why is Lebanon's power sharing system so resilient? Since we're used to talking about it as a state that's on the brink of civil war continuously, and has Lebanon's national identity reached the point of no return in the state-building project that is Lebanon? And I found a rather nice commercial from Biblos Bank that introduces the question of Lebanon's identity and identities in Lebanon rather crisply. It's from 2006, and it should work.
Je suis français. Allemagne. Ich bin Serbian.
Ik is Zuid-Afrikaner.
أنا فلسطيني. أنا إنديان. أنا إماراتي. I'm American. أنا شو نيهونجي بس.
من إيراني هستم.
Yo soy colombiano. أنا سني. أنا غزي.
أنا مارونية.
أنا شيعي.
So when will we just be Lebanese? It asks. Rather tragic, you might say, but quite refreshing compared to a Barclays Bank or an HSBC ad, I would certainly argue. But this question of identity remaining unanswered in Lebanon's contemporary history, I'll just shut that off. I will write a PowerPoint. And the advertisement.
It's a bit of musical accompaniment there, so.
Thank you. That's what I meant to do.
Yeah, that's it. So, just to get the crowd into it.
The question the advertisement's really asking, I suppose, is not only when, but if the Lebanese can ever just be Lebanese. And I suppose I want to challenge whether that's really an important question at all tonight. But as is so often the case with Lebanon, this picture does not tell the whole story. And in a world where multiple identities are the norm, why should Lebanese pluralism be viewed as anachronistic or inherently compatible with the idea of a syncretistic national identity, the sort of identity that exists in the West in places like the United States or the United Kingdom. The development of a Lebanese identity has been heavily influenced by this pluralism that's advertised by Biblos, recurring conflicts over the state and over what form the state should take. This remains the case today. Thank you. The instability that Lebanon has repeatedly experienced since independence, more often than not as a result of regional and international conflicts, makes this appear to be a real weakness rather than an inherent strength. If we compare Lebanon to consolidated divided societies such as the United Kingdom, for example, a state which still bears the scars of numerous state-building failures, British national identity being very loosely defined, it too the sum of many different parts, identities and nationalisms. The centralised British state, constitutionally at least, has been able to absorb identities. It has been able to incrementally cope with regional challenges, shifting imperial to post-imperial international commitments, absorb large migrant communities, and even manage insurgencies against the state, as I'm sure you're all aware of in Northern Ireland. Lebanon's experience has been completely different. And although the perpetuation of its conflicts over identity may imply intransigence towards change on the part of its different communities, the Lebanese state, or the Lebanese nation, has not remained static. As a small country with a history plagued by conflict, power struggles, external influence, and the impact of an extremely volatile region, Lebanon's history is a refuge for persecuted minorities and its cosmopolitan nature, associated with a tradition of international trade, provide compelling evidence that adaptability and openness, characteristics of Lebanese society across the board, are not simply traits that were adopted recently or reluctantly by its people. The Lebanese, at times, have actively encouraged and enjoyed the fruits of diversity and coexistence, and share many components of a common identity. So much so that I think today that describing Lebanon as an example of ethno-national conflict is something of a misnomer. At a number of nodal points in Lebanon's contemporary history, both the state and its people have been tested to their limits, and still there. They're still there. In some cases, these points have yielded positive results for Lebanon, but more often than not, they have the repeated crises that it has experienced have led to conflict and deep-seated insecurity. Given that times of insecurity and conflict, identities and nationalisms become most relevant and exaggerated and are felt most sharply in divided societies, focusing on these nodal points in Lebanon's history and their impacts on identity and nationalism can inform us about the changing nature of the state since independence. The assassination of Rafiq Hariri in 2005, which was followed by Syrian troop withdrawals, is one such nodal point, as was the Hezbollah governmental clashes of 2006, and no doubt, given the regional turmoil and that we're witnessing at present, that there will be that other clashes or nodal points will occur in the not too distant future. Cynics may ask, how long can the Lebanese sit with their feet comfortably under the desk whilst not being the centre of international media attention over their divisions? This poses the question as to whether the persistence of conflicts over the state, many of which share very similar traits or see history in Lebanon repeating itself, will condemn Lebanon to eternal struggle over the soul of the state or national identity, or whether the painful contortions and struggles that Lebanon has experienced have led to the birth of an enduring Lebanese national identity, albeit with contrasting and contradictory visions and images of what Lebanon is or should be. There is, of course, the argument that sometimes you need to destroy to create, and out of the various different acts or periods of destruction that Lebanon has experienced, you see shifts in the tectonic plates that are the meeting points where divisions within society are held. Critics of this line of thinking would certainly point to the fact that Lebanese nationalism is built on very weak foundations, built on sand rather than stone. And this could result in all its achievements being quite easily undone. But Lebanon has not reached a point of no return, a point where it is definitely on the path towards state consolidation and nation-state consolidation. But to me, this is because there's never been a winner in its civil wars. The context test between warring factions who wish to implant their particularistic or idiosyncratic identities onto the genetic instructions that inform the DNA of Lebanese nationalism. And this is not necessarily a bad thing, I would argue, but it is a factor that will remain salient or obvious so long as Lebanon remains at the epicenter of regional and international turmoil. While the Biblos Bank advertisement indicates a common Lebanese identity, that a common Lebanese identity at crisis points appears to be absent, the fact that it identifies the fact that these identities in the ad rise and fall under the Cedar flag, I would argue, symbolises Lebanon's progress. It's one flag. These identities have not to date proved to be stronger than that flag, stronger than the sum of all their parts. For the shared attachment to the land of Mount Lebanon and cooperation displayed between Druze and Maronites even before 1860, to the displays of solidarity through the 2005 Cedar Revolution, it would appear that there are more unifying than divisive factors between Lebanon's communities. For example, the US-Iranian regional conflict that is evident at the surface of Lebanese politics today is something false. It's something transient. However, it fits very neatly with the paradigm of old Lebanese domestic divisions over the state itself, which were played out in the post-independence period, pre-Civil War period. But these arguably I would argue, have long since disappeared. The lengthy Civil War of the 70s and 1980s have largely exhausted the pretensions of Christian separatism, or greater Syrian nationalism, or pan-Arab nationalism that were ever present in the political discourse and the cafes and pubs of Beirut. A second and related argument is that while many Lebanese possess elements of a shared identity and a desire to coexist, this unity has not been given great scope for expression, with some actors going to great lengths, in fact, to prevent it. A third argument I would make, therefore, is that in attempting to inhibit such expression, those interested in maintaining Lebanon's status quo and perpetuating communal divides have imposed the competing identities and nationalisms which have shaped Lebanese history, preventing the consolidation of the national identity that exists within society. If Lebanon then was geographically situated next door to Switzerland, I would argue that this would be a very different case. Now, while I would argue that there is no deep division over the state that was created in 1943 in its current form, that it should exist, what we are seeing in the post-2005 period is two competing Lebanons, two conflicting visions or images of Lebanese nationalism and identity, of the people and the state. And I think Nadim will probably say a few things about that, so I'll not go into too much more detail. The problem is that the state, comprised by traditional elites vying for influence and power, is backed by external actors for whom the achievement of a peaceful and unified Lebanon has at times been an undesirable outcome for them. In contrast, a Lebanese society exists comprised of a diverse mix of religious and ethnic communities which have repeatedly demonstrated their ability and their desire to coexist within a power-sharing framework that allows them to maintain their own communal identities. At a societal level, therefore, it could be concluded that a point of no return regarding identity and a national consciousness that was clearly evident after the Civil War will return again when the present turmoil subsides. More than that, at the state level, all the major actors and parties accept and support a form of government that is premised on Lebanese pluralism. But there isn't always room for all of those elites at the government table. So the divisions and the conflicts you see in the media are as much about elite and intra-elite politics as they are more so about intra-elite politics than they are over the nature of the state, perhaps itself. But as long as Lebanon's internal and external actors behave according to self-interest at Lebanon's expense, progress will be thwarted with the possibility of regression and ever-present danger. So the state of Lebanon is not consolidated, far from it, but a Lebanese identity is perhaps further down the path than the state. So perhaps Lebanon has it the wrong way round. The project of creating a syncretistic national identity, which is the sum of Lebanon's many parts, the groups that comprise it, is arguably more advanced than the state consolidation project. In order to briefly further address those issues, I'll say a couple of things about the concepts of identity and nationalism which substantiate my arguments. Benedict Anderson argues that religion and dynasty were cultural systems already in place which cannot be treated separately from the birth of nationalism. While this may hold true, it is arguably a system of patronage and a common attachment to land rather than religion that dominated life on Mount Lebanon. It appears that Lebanon has followed a contradictory path to most other states, with religion arising as an identity referent at a time when it was declining in the wider international system after the Second World War. German sociologist Theodor Hanf highlights two types of nationalism developed by Hans Küng. Subjectively political, which is voluntary and formed on the creation of a state, and objectively cultural, which is a predetermined origin, language and culture, and which can exist with or without a recognised territory. I think it's quite difficult to see, however, how Lebanon's experiences fit into either category. One of Europe's biggest exports in the 20th century, in response to the ongoing need for nation building, was that of Jacobinism, built on the premise that the abolition of all obstacles to political and cultural unity was an imperative, was necessary in order to achieve a single united republic by an act of will and an action of the state. Theodor Hanf also identifies two ideological tendencies regarding power in multi-communal societies, states. These include mobilization of communal identities, which resists the force of Jacobinism, and syncretistic nationalism, which aims to build a nation based on existing communal differences and identities. Here, the need for a conscious process of nation building is implied, but Lebanon's history of diversity and its ability to coexist indicates that the concept of a syncretistic nationalism in Lebanon for instance, is not necessarily a conscious 20th century creation. Renan draws attention to the concept of voluntary nationalism, which involves the clearly expressed desire to continue a common life. Given the voluntary coexistence evident at various points in Lebanon's history, it could be concluded that Lebanon has possessed a stronger sense of nation in the voluntary sense than most other states in the region. In the search for definitions, Anthony Smith argues that nationalism can broadly be described as an ideology that places the nation at the centre of its concerns and seeks to promote its well-being. He identifies three components required for the survival of a nation: national autonomy, national unity, and national identity. So in this case, we may well consider whether Lebanon is a nation at all. Yet perhaps it is not the nation, but the fervent nationalist approach alluded to by Smith that has failed to survive, or that has failed to materialise in Lebanon. For Lebanon is divided, it lacks sovereignty, and it lacks national unity. It is constantly pulled in different directions. Yet it clearly has a national identity, and one that has the capacity to change and absorb even the most contradictory forces. The endurance of Lebanon, then, and the resilience of its power-sharing system, I would argue, are evidence of this. Compare Lebanon to its neighbours, and I would argue it seems less of an international outlier. With all its divisions. Syria is a state with a small Alawite government which rules without consent in constant search of legitimacy. Israel is a nation which manages not dissimilar deep-seated cultural, ethnic, political, religious divisions as Lebanon does, and it is in constant search of recognition, while the Palestinian Authority is a divided nation in constant search of a state. Now, Lebanon has been too weak to resist the efforts of all three to further their quests for legitimacy, recognition, and sovereignty at Lebanon's expense. Yet the weak pluralist state that is Lebanon endures, and it must endure if the future of the other three in the next half century are to be more comfortable than they have in the last. For Benedict Anderson, to conclude, the creation of imagined communities relies upon the manipulation of history and its use in creating a sense of destiny. Destiny to legitimise nations and destiny to secure their futures. He explains it is the magic of nationalism to turn chance into destiny. Lebanese nationalism is more realistic than this and less imaginary. Lebanon has absolutely no sense of destiny. Even the proponents of its competing visions accept the reality of coexistence. Coexistence which would definitely not be their first preference if they were given different constitutional choices that they could attain. More than that, it is a sense of shared yet uncertain future that holds the Lebanese together, like strangers shipwrecked on a desert island, surrounded by shark-infested waters. For Lebanon. In 2000, Hassan Nasrallah said, "When a peace agreement is concluded between the Lebanese government and Israel, we would surely disagree with the Lebanese government about that, but we would not make any turmoil out of it." Circumstances domestically, regionally, and internationally have fundamentally altered since he said that in 2000. But the logic of Lebanese pluralism is the premise of these sentiments. They may not be borne out in the foreseeable future. I doubt they will. But they remain the heart of the matter in Lebanese politics. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Right. I'll now hand over to Nadim, who will speak to you.
Yes. Thank you. I mean, there is one point which we disagree on.
Good.
I remember because we had this discussion like several, but I'll leave it to the end, which is it's good to be at the LSE because I was here long before many of you were born. I was a student here in the early 1980s, and I was an economist. I repented since. I'm not an economist anymore. But I was working on the history of the school and on the history of economics at the school in the 1930s, the development of the debate between Hayek and Keynes, LSE and Cambridge. And there is one interesting point about the myth of the way the school was set up, which I found to be very relevant to Lebanon, in the sense that in 1870 the fall of Paris to the Prussians, the Bismarck. Bismarck was seen to be the most superior system in Europe, the Bismarck and Prussia. It was seen that the Herr Doctor type, who was organized, who was scientific, who was systematic, and the Herr Doctor type was far superior to the amateur gentleman that the British norm was. The amateur gentleman who studied some classics and could speak Greek and Latin, could recite some poetry, and could rule India with these tools, was seen to be missing. So you had a kind of deep revision of the system, of the values, the institutions, triggered by the sense of failure in front of the great Bismarck and the great German advance in Europe. And this is what in the end resulted in setting up the London School of Economics and Political Science and the Imperial College of Science and Technology. So it was moving towards science, towards more organized, creating conscription and all that. So the main, I think Lebanon is in a process similar to that, in the sense that it's coming out of a war. It's coming out of a 15-year civil war where the system was seen to have failed, and it's coming out of a 15 years of control by Syria, which was felt to be deserved, in the sense that we failed, that the Lebanese have failed, and they cannot form a nation, they cannot form a state, and that's why they need to have tutelage. So when Syrian presence was there, it was rarely questioned, because it was felt that if they left, we would collapse again. So we had to. So I think this kind of re-examination of Lebanese history, of Lebanese values, of Lebanese institutions, is an ongoing process, which was, in a sense, accelerated by the 2005, by events since 2005. So if you want, there is very bad news, there is very, very good news, and there is the ugly news. The bad news from Lebanon is that Lebanon is a divided country. They don't seem to agree on anything. There is an absence of consensus. There is a very weak state institutions. We have rotten politicians. We have mediocre, corrupt politicians who look after their own interests. There's a constant fear of breakdown. The government is continuously paralyzed. This is what you hear the Lebanese complaining about all the time. It's like a ritual. It's almost amounts to self-flagellation. So now the good news from Lebanon, as you must have heard insinuated by Michael, the good news is that we are a divided country. Being divided is not abnormal. Division is, division is part of democracy, is part of having different visions of the world, different political opinions, and being able to express it. But the Lebanese, because they've had a civil war, feel that division is bad in that sense. Absence of consensus. Consensus sucks. Who wants a country where you have full consensus, where you elect leaders at 97.6%, and where everybody belongs to the same party and has the same vision? So in a sense, absence of consensus is part of also democratic life and pluralism and diversity. Failure of the political class, rotten politicians, rotten, corrupt politicians who look after their own interests. Does that sound familiar to any of you? Have you been to Parliament recently? Have you been to Congress? Have you been to the French Assemblée or that? This is the norm. It's only dictators who come up with big visions and who are seen to be to control the moral high ground and all that. Politicians look after their own interests. There is some sort of corruption in political life. There is a lot of commerce of ideas and of positions and all that. And the fear of breakdown and the paralysis of government are, in a sense, what are the negative elements that are holding the country together. Now, so in a sense, the Lebanese are going through a phase where they re-examine their history. They see what they think is the cause of the civil war before, and they try and reevaluate the system and see what, and try and come out with values that they think are going to resolve their problems. And it may be, and this is where I agree with Michael on a lot of things, it may be that there's nothing wrong with their system, that their system could be more of a model for the region. As you heard Michael say, Syria has the same ethnic diversity, Iraq has the same ethnic diversity, Saudi Arabia even has similar ethnic diversity. Well, ethnic is the wrong word. I mean, the same diversity. Let's say on. So in a sense, the managing diversity and the ability to manage diversity in a system of power sharing is not necessarily a taboo that the Lebanese feel. That the Lebanese feel is their problem. So the Lebanese are constantly in fear of, or they're constantly dominated by this specter of the civil war that happened before. And in 2005, you can see the messages that the crowd was giving out was, in a sense, a reply to these hang-ups. So, for example, whereas the Lebanese have a hang-up about being divided in a sectarian manner, and you had the slogans were about national unity and citizenship and all that. So it was in a way they were trying to absolve themselves from these sins. The Lebanese felt that they have weak national feeling, they are weak nationalism, and the dominant view that you see in the crowds was the waving of the flag. I mean, the Lebanese discovered nationalism with a vengeance, while the rest of the world was going globalized. The Lebanese were going the other way and becoming very nationalistic in their flag waving. The weakness of the state is more in fashion nowadays than the strong socialist, all controlling state that was the characteristic of the third world in the 60s. So in a sense, the Lebanese had a laissez-faire state in the 60s when the rest of the world had very strong, organized and planned economies. And in the end, they are now rediscovering or rejecting their laissez-faire and weak state and demanding a strong state when the rest of the world is looking for weaker state control and more and less planning and less nationalization and all that. So now, how does this fit with what's happening? I mean, with the theme of your now, I think that there is a sense where sectarianism and divisions and all that are sometimes in the eye of the beholder as much as they are in a reality. So there is a need for re-examination of Lebanese history and all these concepts. For example, you've all heard that there is something called the National Pact in Lebanon, which is an agreement between the Sunnis and the Maronites. Why should we call it an agreement between the Sunnis and the Maronites? It was an agreement between two gentlemen, two politicians, two corrupt politicians, or two normal politicians, let's say, because corruption is normal. Two normal politicians looking after their own interest and looking after their re-election. And they knew that they had no chance of being re-elected had they stood separately. Their opponents were much stronger, so they decided to form an alliance. They each went out of the meeting describing that alliance in a different manner to their own constituency. This is why it's all ambiguous and it's never written and all that. But historians say there was an agreement between the Maronites and the Sunnis. It's not true. It's an agreement between the two politicians, one of whom happens to be a Maronite, the other happens to be a Sunni. So there may be a lot of normal politics involved in the Lebanese system that we don't see because the observers have a sectarian view of things. It's not the subject that has a sectarian view. It's the people who observe that have the sectarian view. So we have to purify the observers as much from sectarianism as much as the Lebanese themselves, as you've seen in the advert that Michael has shown us, which is an excellent illustration of the way the Lebanese are re-examining their history, how they are ashamed of these divisions, and instead of being seeing them as normal things. So, if we come back to the divisions now in Lebanon, you have, and the way if you look at the headlines and the language that is used in describing Lebanon, I think that a lot of it is part of the legacy of the civil war, or of the 80s, or of previous conceptions that we have of the country. The headlines are always about bickering politicians, or bickering sectarian politicians, or the conflicting parties, or it's as though division and disagreement is a bad thing. So because the Lebanese have collapsed, then they have to comply with the Jacobin view of society and become uniform. So in a sense, if we look at the current division in the country, it is a division which is almost entirely, almost purely political, in the sense that there is one side of the equation that believes in a certain view of society based on their interpretation of what the Civil War was about, and based on their interpretation of what the future could be, and the other and a conflicting view of it from the other side. And this division between what is called March 14 and March 8, but which also could be given lots of other terms, exists almost within each family, within each sect or religion or area or town. You would not attend a family lunch either in the mountains or in the south or in the north or anywhere in Lebanon without finding a disagreement amongst the population. Now coming back to what this means in terms of the revolutions that are happening in the country, in the area, Lebanon in a way needs 18 revolutions, because you have there is a need for reforming the electoral system to facilitate the expression of the diversity in ideas, and so the electoral system consolidates the power of certain politicians who have hegemony over their religious groups or their religious minorities, and the need for reform is always blocked and by the same politicians who want to maintain their power. But if you look at what's happened in January of this year, and you look at the way it was described in the press, you had well, let's put it this way. In January, you had a change of government in Lebanon. It was described in the press as a country on the brink of civil war, with Sunnis and Shiites about to enter into conflict, with sectarian politicians and factions coming against each other and all that. But in reality, it was a very simple constitutional process where you have 128 deputies, 71 were part of the majority, 57 were part of the minority, 11 members of parliament that formed one bloc split into two, and this was the more or less of the same religious group. They split into two, and another bloc split into two, and that's how the majority changed, and you have a change of government. It's all completely normal politics, but in the way it was being described as very alarmist and very, very sort of panicky titles and all that. And if you look at, if you have a conversation with any of your Lebanese friends, and some of them are here, you will find this language of self-examination and self-flagellation, which expresses the crisis being used all the time. And I tried it as a, and I will finish with this. I tried it for fun on Facebook. I put when these revolutions were starting, I put on Facebook. I said, Lebanon is the most stable country in the Middle East. And I put that around midnight, and I woke up in the morning and found something like 57 comments, and I chose some of them to show you. So one of them was a friend in the Gulf who's a professor, and he said, Lebanon is a failed state kept together by foreign puppeteers. And someone from Lebanon said, Lebanon is a super failed state. And, another person said, shall we understand that Lebanon as a failed state needs foreign saviors? How do you think we'll become a normal state? Now, another person from the US, Harvard postdoctoral student, said, if I may, I don't think that foreign puppeteers saved Lebanon. They just merely hold it together, even if it is precisely because it is in the gutter. And so the conversation continues, and one of them says, since I was a 3-year-old boy, my father kept telling me, until his death, that we are a failed state. We're always a failed state. We'll always be a failed state. And then continues, Lebanon is not just a failed state. It is not a state to begin with. And then comes the pièce de résistance, because one of them asks, so how do we live? How do we live? We are 4 million people, a small piece of land. Why should it be so complicated? How do we live? And here, all the traumas of the Civil War surface. You have one person saying, first, by learning to be civilized. Second, by learning to be modest. Lebanon is not the center of the world. Third, by working on a vision of how people, regardless of their background, sect, color, of their skin, or so-called ethnicity and the like, should live decently and democratically in a tiny piece of land and secure a viable country for their children, and so forth, by becoming a meritocracy, not one with none of these basic premises are met in our country. People are generally rude and aggressive. Look at how they drive, for God's sake. Look how Mr. Berry addresses MPs in Parliament. Uncivilized. Does anyone respect a queue? Disorganized and undisciplined. Look at the chaotic state of any ministry and government department. Illiterate. How many people read? How many public libraries do we have? How many art galleries? They even sold the opera house to a profoundly capitalist venture. Appallingly superficial, chauvinistic, tribal, incompetent leaders and neophytes. It goes on and on and on and on and on. And it's part of the symptoms of the re-examination of the self-re-examination that's happening in the country. And I'll stop here.
Excellent. Thank you both for very interesting speeches. You can guarantee whenever you discuss Lebanon, you're going to have some very spirited, interesting opinions. But the last description you gave sounds like a description of London. So
Yeah,
very healthy.
yeah, exactly. So, but basically now we have some time for you guys to ask some questions. If we could just keep it to kind of short, punchy questions and not sort of long comments. So nobody wants to have a chance to say something. And to go against that, I'm actually going to steal the first question. So, I want to ask you both if you agree on something. Do you agree that, analytically, when looking at Lebanon and its politics, the ethnic card is overplayed when people are kind of looking at it? Is it just politics as usual that the outside world or observers see as ethnic, or is there really something there in terms of ethnic politics?
Well, that's one of my points. There is a lot of normal politics that goes on in the country, and there are normal divisions, normal differences of opinion, and a lot of diversity that should be considered as normal. But because there is a hang-up about division, because of the former collapse of society and the Civil War and all that, what should be considered as normal is seen with alarm. So if two people argue, and one of them is a Sunni and the other one is a Shia, or one of them is a Christian, one other, people can see it as a confessional or sectarian argument, whereas it is a normal argument by two people. So
I think one of the points, Nadim, you were making is that I don't think whilst we're both supportive of the system, we're not. I don't think either of us are saying that it couldn't do with a massive dose of reform in all directions. And one of the things that's lacking is political parties, which Nadim alluded to, and the electoral system. I'm not saying that would take away entirely the sectarian or religious or ethnic aspects of politics, but even if we look at the divisions within Lebanon today, they're not on ethnic lines. The two sides are coalitions of various different groups and communities that are split right down the middle themselves and families. But this, of course, goes back, to the origins of Lebanon as well. I mean, who, for example, the Maronites are with the Sunnis at the minute, or half the Maronites are with the Sunnis at the minute, in opposition to Hezbollah Maronite Druze. But if you go back to the 1850s and the 60s, the Maronites' natural partners in Lebanon are the Druze. It's Maronite Druze pluralism that are the foundations of the contemporary confessional state, and these things are fluid. So even to talk about a Muslim Christian national pact, it wasn't that, because even in 1943, the different religious communities did not fit neatly into the boxes of Christian or Muslim. There were many greater Syrian nationalists who were Christian, etc., etc. So it's never been that simple, and it isn't today either.
Excellent, great. Thanks for your answer. It sounds like you both kind of agree there. So I'll turn it over to the floor now. If anyone has a question, I'll go to the lady here, please.
There is a non-sectarian political party in Lebanon that has been for a long time, is the PPS.
Mm-hmm.
And there were non-sectarian political parties in Syria as well. That was the Ba'ath party until it divided into the Iraq Ba'ath and Syrian Ba'ath. So the community the diversity is not ethnic but cultural, and it is not the only factor that divides the Lebanese, because many Lebanese were in the PPS, both Christians and Muslims. It is the appearance of Islamic fundamentalism that divides in Lebanon at the moment.
Yeah, I think, and other fundamentalisms. I mean, Islamic fundamentalism is not the only party or view in the state that you could describe as fairly fundamental, I would argue, but I don't disagree with you.
Excellent. Let's go to the gentleman here, please.
Just a question how important you would say international borders are, because on one hand it's a highly volatile region with sort of the conflict with Israel and Syria on one hand. On the other hand, you have the enormous amounts of expats that sort of allow Lebanon to survive, or are incredibly important for its economic survival. So do you think Lebanon is more sort of benefiting from the outside pressures that forces people to come up with a compromise? Or do you think it's more sort of diluted by the international connections that allow it to prevent, or that allows policymakers and the general public to sort of prevent of coming to a final agreement, because they can always sort of rely on either an outside actor bailing them out?
I mean, I think for me, sovereignty is a big question for Lebanon for the future. We both mentioned the Palestinian territories, Israel and Syria, and different regional conflicts have been played out in Lebanon. How does Lebanon, in the medium to long term, secure its own borders? How does it get its neighbours to respect its own borders? How does it get its neighbours to relinquish? I'm talking about Syria. I mean, and there's been some steps towards this, arguably. Nadim may disagree. Its irredentist claim towards Lebanon, and the outlier issue of Hezbollah and Hezbollah's weapons, which again is an external construct in the sense that Hezbollah is allowed to maintain its arms at the end of the civil war, 20 years later, Lebanon is in a situation which is unsustainable, having one party or one half of a sect which has a political party which makes all the other political parties, which they're not, look bad, because it has a manifesto and things, but it also has a power and arms which are stronger than probably the sum of all the other parts of Lebanon and their military capacities, or the state's military capacity, and arguably, even as we've seen in 2006, such a potent force at the behest of Iran that its previous sponsor, Syria, I think would hasten to get involved in some of the clampdowns or clashes that it has done in the past with it, and Israel as well. So I mean, how can Lebanon strengthen its borders? How can a regional agreement be reached whereby Lebanon is allowed to have a navy, is allowed to have a national army that secures its own state? But this goes back to Lebanon being propped up in the gutter by external forces. If you took those away at the moment, in a moment of crisis, all hell would probably break loose.
If you took what away?
Some of the external forces that are holding it where it is, on the brink.
Yeah. Okay. I think the contradiction that exists, which you presented now, has always been there in Lebanese politics. That the question of how do you protect yourself, how do you maintain sovereignty, and the answers of whether you do it through a international protection, or whether you do it by having an army and a navy, and that's because let's put it this way: if you went to Lebanon in the 1960s, you would find two cocktail parties. One cocktail party would be composed of the Levantine elite that are behind the ideology that dominated in Lebanon before the war. So you would find people from all over the region who have escaped nationalization in Syria, who have escaped the revolutions in Egypt, in Iraq, in the elite of Palestine, the elite of southern Turkey, all this commercial Levantine elite who have been doing trade and have been protected by through the Ottoman capitulations for centuries. This is part of their fabric, their culture. These people would be in one cocktail party, and they were the dominant force behind the system in Lebanon. Now, so they created a system which has a weak state, because a strong state is anathema to free trade and all that, and with no taxes, with no army, because an army is also something that can do a coup, or so you want to keep the state weak, you want to maintain trade, you want to keep freedom. Now, the second party you would go to across town is the more funky party, where you will find the PLO, the PFLP, the DFLP, Carlos the Jackal, the Japanese Red Army, the German Baader-Meinhof gang, the Italian. Sorry?
Criminalizing the
No, it's not criminalizing left. This was the you'd also find the Sandinistas were there, the Sendero Luminoso, the whole. So all the ones that wanted to fight the revolutions of the world and all that were on the other side of town. Now, the two parties still exist in Lebanon, because the division between the two sides in Lebanon are still the same. One side, which is the March 14, wants to revive the Monaco aspect of Beirut, the Riviera type city, which is protected by the West, which is all that. And the other one wants to build a kind of a citadel and build a resistance resistance society with all that it entails in terms of culture, economy, and all that. And the truth is that it's not either or, because the two are dependent on each other. The resistance society cannot survive in a strong state. So the weak state that was created by the Levantine elite allows the space for that kind of society so they're interdependent from each other. You could not have had the PLO flourish either in Jordan or in Egypt or in Syria or in Iraq or anywhere else. The PLO flourished in Lebanon because of the freedom afforded to it by so this balance of the two in a sense is inevitable. They both need each other. The weak state cannot be protected if there is no resistance, and the resistance cannot exist if there was no weak state. And so this sort of dichotomy is part of the Lebanese compromise, that they should coexist. So you'll never reach a stage where one will completely cancel the other. So I think this debate over sovereignty or absolute values like sovereignty or freedom and all that are in an ideal atmosphere, in a region where you have a conflict and you have to survive with it, and you have neighbors like Israel and Syria, and that the best case scenario is to have the coexistence of both projects.
Can I just add one thing to that? I mean, in remembering and in thinking about how deep and sharp that contrast was in the 1960s, we should remember that Lebanon was the only other state in the region after 1948 and before 1967 where Middle Eastern Jews decided to go and live instead of Israel. Thousands and thousands actually chose to go to Lebanon, to go to that Mediterranean cosmopolitan, pluralistic place rather than the Israeli state.
Excellent. So very interesting answers. You'll have to let us know how to get onto the guest list for those two parties next time we're in Beirut.
Well, the other one is more funky, you know.
Well, yeah, it sounds a lot more interesting. So yeah,
You just don't want to stay the night.
leave before it gets ugly. So we'll just go here and then we'll go to the lady over there. So.
Nonetheless, what I'm missing is, or I'm astonished that in the wake of Arab Revolution, all we're talking about is the state, sovereignty, parties led by elites, and there's nowhere are the people in your argument. So where do the people of Lebanon, those who fit in neither one of those boxes, yet make the state live in spite of itself? Because I would suggest we have reached a state where the state exists at the expense of the people. I wonder where feature the people in your argument, and how would you conceive of strengthening their voice within this entrenched sectarian political system?
Well, you see, your description of an entrenched sectarian political system is wrong.
No, institutionalized system. I'm not saying that sectarianism is intrinsic to the attitudes of people. It's built into the structure of the system, qua constitution.
Yeah, you see, there are two views of the power sharing arrangement that exists between the Lebanese. One of them is that this is culturally a deeply rooted mode of operation in the whole region during the Ottoman times. So for 500 years, and even during Mamluk times, before nation states were created, the mixture was always there. And so the fact that you have in the Ottoman world a millet system where the various sects would coexist and have autonomy is deeply entrenched into the culture of the region. Nobody can imagine living in completely separate ghettos. And one of the objects of creating the power sharing system was that if you protect the rights of the minorities, then they can drop the affiliation, meaning that if the power of the Shias or the Sunnis or the Christians or the Druze or the Maronites or whatever is not questioned because it's part of a rigid power sharing system where it's guaranteed to exist forever in that sort of balance, then you can come out of your identity. You can be a citizen by not being forced to adhere to that identity. So the power sharing system in that sense allowed for the political division to happen. And the other view is that the power sharing system consolidated the identities. But the way Lebanon is divided now shows that the power sharing system allowed for political divisions to flourish without threatening the identity of the different groups.
What's the bridge amongst the different communities then?
What's the, sorry?
The bridge.
Why do you need a bridge?
Well, if you belong to a community, but at the same time you have an overall interest on political basis, there must be some common point, which is precisely the creation of a Lebanese identity, different from the Syrian or Jordanian.
Well, this is one of the points where there is a slight difference between Mike and I, in the sense that I don't think such a bridge is necessary. There is no need for national identity. Is overrated. It's more the Ernest Renan vision that Mike talked about, which is that it's a nation state is formed by people who have the will to live together, this is enough. You don't have to have a national identity or something that. I mean, cohesiveness is overrated actually, a cohesive state never existed anywhere in the world.
What about political participation? What about the citizen who wants to be part and have a voice in the political system? Would you say that Lebanon provides this for its people?
Yes, because the citizen can vote, and there is accountability. The elite in Lebanon have changed radically in the last 30 years. I mean, if you look at, if you talk to Lebanese, they'll tell you we have the same rulers, the same politicians over and over again. But if you look at reality, all the urban elite have changed. I mean, all the big families who were the notable families that were that dominated politics in the 50s and 60s and 70s have disappeared. They don't have any representation in parliament. You have a new elite that's come out in amongst them. Even amongst the Shias, you have the families that had power have completely disappeared, and you have a new elite that have come back, that have dominated. Amongst the Maronites, you have the same thing. Amongst the Druze, for the first time in January, you have a split. Jumblat now controls 6 MPs out of 11, and 5 of them went away. So there's this myth, which is more in the eye of the beholder than in reality, that Lebanon is a sectarian state where people vote for sectarian political parties, which have unanimous following amongst groups, because there is an innate something like almost essential in the Lebanese that they follow sectarian leaders, and this is not true.
Can I
it's not true anywhere.
Yeah, I didn't mean to suggest.
No, yeah.
Can I address both those points? I mean, in the eye of the beholder, I mean, you're Lebanese, you're the observer looking in, but very often looking out. I'm an observer looking in, and I don't always see in Lebanon, the colour of people's skin or the different, communal identities first. I do see the bridges as a foreigner there, and they change at different times. They're more evident. They were more evident during Syrian occupation than they were the last couple of times. Because
what do you mean by the bridge?
Just commonalities, common identity, culture and outlook, language, and I can see the different identities beneath the surface, but certainly presented outwards. That's very obvious to a foreign observer. But it's not something that has to remain static, and I don't think it's something. I mean, people in Britain don't talk about British nationalism. It's not something they cling to or discuss or think about or care about. I was noted on the census, the recent census the other day, there's even an ethnic category, Northern Irish. That wasn't there before.
Really?
Yes, really. How does that work?
Is it divided into Catholic and Protestant?
No. And the state doesn't even care anymore whether you are Catholic or Protestant. It just asks a Christian, including all denominations. But to go back to the people, I mean, I think what I was trying to say, or maybe didn't say clearly enough, was that I think the Lebanese certainly have a voice, and if the elites were not able to play the high politics that knife-edge coexistence brings to the fore in a place like Lebanon. It's the same in Northern Ireland. Their careers, their raison d'etre is about the division, and then there would be calls for reform. There would be calls for people to stop driving at 120 miles an hour up the highway on a Saturday night, like if you were in a video game. There would be calls for educational reform. There would be calls for there would be a logic, and it wouldn't be dangerous, for elites to take that step forward and invest in the Lebanese state as opposed to just investing in one segment of their own community.
But this is where we fundamentally disagree. I don't think we need to reach a stage where we are these colorless, odorless citizens. I think it is deeply entrenched in our culture in Lebanon to be diverse, and we will never be. And it's not that the Lebanese are different from any others. It's society in Syria is exactly the same as Lebanon. In Palestine, it's the same. In Iraq, it's the same. The system doesn't recognize the division. It's not that divisions do not exist, and I think it's a positive thing.
But I mean, I'm talking about class.
Yes.
I'm talking about class issues here, Nadim, in the sense that the system, absolutely fails large sections of society. I mean, before Hezbollah and before Iranian money and Iranian hospitals and Iranian funded, construction jihad, the Shia lived in poverty in southern Lebanon,
No, that's another myth.
Well, there's certainly, but I mean, where's the money? Where's the money, coming from that projects Shia power within society? It's not.
Money in, you see, if you go to the south now, the money comes from exactly the same sources as it comes either in the mountains or in the north, or it comes from immigration, it comes from religious institutions, non-state institutions. Very little money comes from state institutions. And now, as it happens that in the south, Hezbollah has monopolized the community institutions, but this does not mean that without Hezbollah there would not be community institutions. What you have in common between all the areas is the weakness of the state. That's what you have in common, and the weakness of the state is seen as one of the main problems in the country. Whereas I see it as from where I sit, I prefer a weak state, especially after having lived in England for so long. I think a weak state is more of a. I mean, if you look at the way the British economy is going, we are paying the price. Our future generations are going to pay the price of the crazy way the welfare state was done.
It was a welfare state. In Lebanon, you have families like that.
No, you have family, you have religious institutions, you have private institutions, you have everything.
Yeah, but that structure is not applied to other countries.
Yeah. I'll just go to the lady over here. Then.
Hi, it's a question for both of you. What do you know about the upcoming demonstration calling for Isqat al-Ta'ifi, the overthrow of sectarianism? Is there a proper movement that calls for the overthrow of sectarianism and electoral reform and possibly the end of religious law in family matters? Or is it just sort of another one of these protests that are ongoing and that are a little bit sort of idealistic and not actually?
I mean, I think whenever the Lebanese start debating and holding conferences and rallies to overthrow the confessional system, it's a real sign of stability within the country, because they're not arguing over something else.
But it's quite a new thing. There haven't been protests about this particular.
No, but the debate is as old as the hills.
No, you see, there has always been movements within Lebanese society calling for secularism.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Sorry. Excuse me.
Yeah. since the 60s, and even during the Civil War, there's always been...
Sorry, excuse me, can you wait until after, please?
There's always been movements like that I mean, Kamal Salibi, the Lebanese historian, says that Lebanon has many problems, but one of its problems is that a lot of the population think that either fascism or secularism will resolve them. I don't think there are two extremes. One is there is a tendency there's a yearning for a strong leader, which the Lebanese had at certain times in history, and which ruined, which caused a lot of ruin. So there's a yearning for a strong leader, which I think is bad, and there's a yearning for secularism, which I also think is not. I mean, I believe in separation of church and state, and in a society where you have such diversity of churches, you cannot have a dominant state and keep the separation going, because you cannot have a neutral state in that sense.
If I can add one thing to that, I didn't answer your question particularly well. I mean, whenever there's a call for fundamental constitutional change, which secularism and the ridding Lebanon of confessionalism would be, you have to ask yourself, what is actually behind that, and what on the surface sounds like a very liberal and good idea. What's the agenda behind the party that is promoting that? At different times in Lebanese history, there were various different proponents of that. I mean, one is the Lebanese national movement in the 1970s, which is backed by the PLO, which fundamentally is a movement to take over the state. Hezbollah used to call for
secularism.
Well, the abolition, the abolition. But they don't anymore. They don't anymore because they in theory they've accepted that vision is highly unlikely.
I'll just take a question from the gentleman here, please.
The two very general factors which I wonder whether you would agree condition the situation, and unfortunately I think both in rather pessimistic directions. One is the rigidity of the institutional setup. There's no inbuilt mechanisms that are functioning for internal change of the institutional setup in a peaceful way. So sooner or later, and it continues to exist because it's weak, because people can sort of behave in a way which contradicts it without it. But sooner or later, any rigid system in the face of major cultural, economic, political changes is going to fracture. And the other one, general factor, which I think is also pointing in a negative direction, is that the fate of the country, the destiny of the country, depends so much on the decisions that are made by more powerful countries around it. And it's so easy for them to play out their conflicts between each other, not on their own territories, but on the territory of a third party, as, for example, between the Nasirians and others in the 1960s and 50s in Lebanon. So its dependence on that makes it very, very aleatory whether this state will survive or not.
Yeah. You want to give it a shot?
I mean, a couple of things about that. I don't disagree, and this is one of the, the thesis of internal divisions leading to civil war in 1975. That the state imploded because it didn't have the mechanisms for change. Now, we've been talking about two competing visions. But Lebanon between 1990 and 2005 experienced one of those visions, in the sense that you had direct rule or power sharing by proxy from Damascus, Syrian hegemony, and Lebanon could go through that experience again, and I think the power sharing system would snap back into the middle and work again. The alternative vision of that is in 20 or 30 years' time, you have a Middle East that has seen, or maybe 50 years' time, massive transformation, and you have much friendlier neighbours surrounding Lebanon, and I think then Lebanon would find those mechanisms, perhaps even at some point in the future, without the external forces that have dragged it to water and made it reformulate its national pacts many times in the past. But I think Lebanon will be stuck in limbo until that external context changes, and I don't imagine that radical institutional transformation will be possible until there are fundamental changes to the Middle East state system.
Right. I'm going to reverse the question in the sense that had there not been such a rigid system in Lebanon, it would have collapsed a long time ago, because the system is, the rigidity of the system is built on a resistance to being taken over by one single group. It's an impossibility with the current checks and balances that exist within the constitution and within the procedures and within all that, for any single group or any single political party or even the army or Hezbollah or whatever to take over and control the political life. If that was not the case, it would have become very quickly, in the 60s probably, like any other country in the region, where in Syria you have 10% of the population dominating 90%. In Iraq you have 15% dominating the 85%, and all that. So the rigidity of the system, in a way, kept it, because it can collapse in the sense that there are problems that it cannot surmount, but it cannot be changed in order to preserve the variety. Lebanon has the built-in mechanisms will always prevent a one-party state or a one-color state, and I think this is a good thing. I mean, personally, I think that I would not like to live in a one-party state or a state dominated by one faction or anything else. Now, the regional circumstances and this is where I think the theme of the seminars, which I only realized when you were giving the introduction, is that migration is also part of the... Lebanon was built by migration. It's in migration from the region. Lebanon only became Lebanese in the 90s. The dominant culture was one that included an input from Egypt, from Syria, from Iraq, from Turkey, from Palestine, from everywhere. If the region is going to change to become better, it will probably change towards Lebanon rather than Lebanon changing towards the region. Look at Iraq. Iraq is now developing a power sharing system between the various factions and moving towards a weak state. And if for any reason there is any improvement in the situation in Syria, then it will not be hegemony of the Alawites over the rest of the population. They will have to find a power sharing system to manage their otherwise they will become even more sectarian. So that's the very chauvinist Lebanese view.
The world would change according to Lebanon.
But of course, Nadim's analysis exemplifies why so many states in the region have had an interest in Lebanon not being too successful in the 20th century.
But if the system was not that rigid, which you describe, it would have become a one-party state a long time ago. It would have been taken over in the 50s. It would have survived as a diverse, liberal, pluralist society with a weak state for maybe 5 years after independence.
And the fact that this system originates from an agreement between two corrupt politicians, as Nadim described them, that wasn't even written on paper, illustrates the bonds that do exist institutionally and at societal level between the communities, which is ultimately a good thing.
But excuse me.
I have to take a question.
If it was what would be a better thing? Can you give me an example of a better system that Lebanon could have?
Yeah, I mean, we can maybe come back to the lady here a bit, because we have a few people waiting. Are you sure?
No, we want him to ask a question.
Yeah, and we have a gentleman
actually,
who...
I had a comment, which is the way you look at Lebanon, or you analyze Lebanon, or you study Lebanon, whether from a sectarian point of view or not, or from an institutional point of view. The effort at the beginning is very significant, because this is how we, you interpret it, like when we will have, Lebanese will have a common identity. But back then in 2006, a lot of Lebanese said that the flag only fell down when the Shia expressed themselves.
When the what?
When the Shia expressed themselves, because if you repeat the YouTube video, only when the Shia said, I'm Shi'i, and I'm Shi'i, the flag fell down. This is the way that I interpret it. Not from a sectarian point of view, but rather from a political point of view, because exactly the post-2005. So this is one comment. I'm not going to ask questions or comment.
That's
interesting. It's a way to understand Lebanon and go beyond the sectarian analysis. Because one of the pitfalls, if I may say, that usually we don't separate, and this is what Nadim was referring to, but without mentioning it explicitly, between the state and the political system. And the state was not created in 1943, it was created in 1920. The political system was created in 1943. There is a big difference here. And this is a good starting point. 1926,
the Constitution.
No, I mean the state.
The state, okay.
Which is in terms of institutions, in terms of, So, and there's a big difference between the state and the political system. And then we should not probably talk about weak state, rather we should talk about weak political system. And not a failed political system, a weak political system. Because as you said, Benedict Anderson mentioned about, the imagined communities. This is what was happening in Lebanon. But at the same time, we always had frustrated imagined community, which was not taking part of the, this state now. So,
would you like to make a comment on the comment? Or
was there a question as well?
No? I just wondered if you even had to say. So we move on.
Yeah, but I mean, again, without all these checks and balances that exist that are built into the system and that prevent change, the system would have gone to at least one imagined outcome, which would have been very much in tune with the way politics is run in the rest of the region, and so that's one of the advantages of the system.
The state was never violent in Lebanon. The society was violent with the state, unlike Syria, Iraq. You said it clearly. They managed diversity in different ways.
And one of the benefits of that is that Lebanon is a fundamentally different place than it was in 1920, 1943, 1967, 1990, 2005. It has progressed and developed in different ways culturally, politically to some extent, whereas other states in the region have remained particularly static. I remember the first time I went to Syria, which was in 2001, and I noted as I was getting a taxi into the city that the only sort of symbols of modernity that I could visibly see were communist symbols from Assad's relationship with the Soviets from the late 60s and early 70s on the sides of buildings. No internet, nothing, and that's Lebanon's not like that at all. It's radically advanced compared to other parts of the Middle East.
But can I add to this that Lebanon has regressed a lot since 1990 because of what Monica has been saying, because of this desire for nationalism and the feeling of because in the 60s we had a very cosmopolitan atmosphere, completely devoid of any nationalism or any sort of desire for uniformity or anything like that.
Nadim, you're giving away which cocktail party you were at.
Yes, that was the dominant. No, but even both cocktail parties were like that. After the civil war, the Lebanese came out yearning for a strong state, yearning for a strong leader, yearning for a strong security system, yearning for nationalism, thinking that it is these characteristics that they had in the 60s that made the state fail. So they were trying to move towards the other extreme, which I personally think is bad. That's my personal preference. Yeah. So I'm glad they failed, and the reason why they failed is because the system is so rigid in terms of protecting itself from hegemony by any single idea or group, that it was bound to fail on that. So, and if you didn't have that rigid system in the first place, you wouldn't have had that diversity again.
Excellent. I think we have a question from the gentleman here.
My question is a bit different. It's about Cedar. I'm sure you both know about Cedar. So in line with your argument about the post-1990 period, about Lebanese re-examining themselves, where does Cedar fit into this idea of unifying Lebanese? And do you think it has the potential to maybe create that new identity? Because to be fair, it's probably the one thing which is successful in the country.
Well, not yet. It's not successful yet, Solidar, because
it's still seen as the big thing.
Yeah.
At night, probably.
Okay. No, I'll tell you in what way Solidar is a success of the system. It's that Michel Chiha, who is the sort of originator of a lot of the ideas that dominated in Lebanon. Michel Chiha used to say that we have to accept that not everybody in the country adheres to the same to our ideas. That some people would want to build a strong state, or etc., or a nationalist state, or an ethnic state, or whatever. But he said that if our ideas are allowed to show their benefits in practice, then people will see the benefit of these ideas and there will be consensus around them. Yeah? Now, of course, this never happened because there was never enough period of peace for these ideas to be. But it's when the system failed that people started appreciating it. So if you look at Hariri's websites in the early 90s when he was promoting Solidar, Hariri, who is an Arab nationalist whose entourage were all former left-wing Arab nationalists also, was using the same language as Michel Chiha in the 40s and 50s. He was saying that Beirut will become the financial center and trade center, that the Lebanese should invest in becoming the hub for a peaceful region. So he was investing in the peace process and all that. So he had adopted all these Levantine ideas that were so alien to him 20 years before. I mean, he had this is what is in a way the success of the system, that it managed to recruit a lot of people, of diversity of people.
And there's not a lot of other countries in the region that you could imagine that happening.
Well, I don't think the rest of the region have had the chance. For me, Syria is a country under occupation. It's not there's no political society. It's the same as Iraq. And where this becomes obvious is now in Libya. Libya, the people have risen against the system, and the system is showing that it's one family and one party occupying hijacking the country. So this could never happen in if it was allowed to happen in Lebanon, it would have happened a long time ago.
Does anyone have any other questions they'd like to ask? No? If not, we'll just thank our speakers again for coming and delivering a very interesting talk and answering some very interesting questions. So, thank you very much. But before we adjourn, I have a couple of announcements. Firstly,